the series of lecture on staffing and coordination, we discussed about what is human resource management, and then we discussed human resource management process, where we further we discussed about the stages of human resource planning, job analysis, job description and specification, and various processes of recruitment. And further we are moving on to what is selection and the process of selection. And first I will start with the discussion of what is selection. Selection is a process of screening or choosing from among the candidates, a pool of candidates from within the organization or from outside the organization, the most suitable person for the current position or the vacant position for or future positions which are or the future vacancies required. Then what is careful screening? Careful screening employees, why it is important? It results in improved employee and organizational performance. If we select a wrong candidate for a particular job position, the person would not be able to carry on the tasks and responsibilities, and he would not be effectively performing. Managers therefore depend on the effective selection or screening of employees. Selection can reduce dysfunctional behavior at work, and effective screening helps reduce cost in the long run. So, what we will discuss that careful screening of employees is important because it results in improved employee and organizational performance. Managers depend on subordinates, and this can reduce dysfunctional behavior at work. Effective screening helps reduce cost in the long run. So, selection of a candidate is very important process in the organization, as a wrong selection or an improper fit can reduce the performance and effectiveness of organization. So, therefore, identification of a right candidate with use of right selection technique is very important. And now moving further in the selection process, we will discuss in details. There are 3 steps in the selection process. It starts with initial screening, substantive selection and contingent selection. Let us know what are these 3 steps in selection process: initial selection, substantive selection and contingent selection. Initial selection, the applicant who does not meet basic requirements are rejected. That means, this step is the screening out of say candidates who are not suitable. In the first screening phase, if the candidate is not found to be suitable for a particular position, his application is screened out. Then in the substantive selection, applicants who meet basic requirements but are less qualified than others are rejected. So, there is a comparative assessment being made in comparison to other candidates who are equally qualified. So, those candidates who are qualified but who meet basic requirements but are not suitable as per the qualifications, so they are rejected in the substantive selection. In the third phase, applicants who are among the best qualified or the most suitable candidate are selected. So, applicants who are among the best qualified but who fail contingent selection are rejected. So, what is the selection process? Selection process consists of 3 stages. One is initial selection, substantive selection and contingent selection. In the initial selection, applicants who do not meet the basic requirements, who are completely not suitable for the position, are rejected. The second phase, that is substantive selection, applicants who meet basic requirements but are less qualified as compared to others are rejected. In the third phase, that is contingent selection, applicants who are among the best qualified but who fail contingent selection test, they are, of course, they are the best qualified, but who do not meet or who fail to meet the contingent selection are rejected. So, finally, after passing through these 3 stages, that is initial, substantive selection and contingent selection, an applicant receives job offer. In the stage 1, that is initial selection, initial selection devices are used to determine if basic qualification for the jobs are met. Devices include the application form and the background check, like good initial screening. In the application form, good initial screen, then must be very careful about the questions which are being asked about legal issues, whether the candidate is involved in any kind of, say, there is any legal issue associated with the candidate credential. So, that need to be identified, and further in the background check, which is very important to know whether to know any kind of criminal association or any kind of forgery the candidate is associated with. So, candidates background check is mandatory. Most employers want reference of say of a candidate. So, referees must be knowing the candidate over a period of time. Either they have any kind of job association or any past association during their journey of academics. So, there must be some kind of knowledge about the person who is giving a reference should be knowing candidate and his or her credentials. So, but few give it out. So, most employers want reference information, but few ignore or they do not try to take information about the candidate. So, letter of recommendation is similarly another method of getting to know about the candidate and his or her background. And the third one is maybe if it is useful to check the criminal record or credit report or credentials of the candidate who is the prospective candidate who has applied for a particular position. In the stage 2, that is substantive selection, these devices are the heart of the selection process. What are these techniques? Written test and performance simulation test. So, written test tests the applicant's ability or intelligence or cognitive ability, personality, integrity and interest in the current position which has or for the vacancy which has arisen. Intelligence tests are the best predictors across all the jobs. For any job, there would be some kind of necessary skills required, some say which will test the cognitive ability, test personality, integrity of the candidate and the job skills or competencies required, such as negotiation skills, conflict management skills, communication or say teamwork or interpersonal trust. So, all these skills are important in different degrees in different jobs. Some jobs require a higher mental ability, some jobs require the physical toughness of a candidate. So, based on the nature of job, written tests are also important and written tests help in substantive selection. The next one is performance simulation test. Performance simulation, there are some simulated environment being created to give the candidate a similar kind of environment as required in the job. So, which will also test the ability of a person to perform based on the job related performance required. Performance simulation tests are being given. This also includes work sample test. What is work sample? Creating a miniature replica of a job to evaluate the performance ability of job candidates. Similarly, there is another method called assessment center. Assessment center, a set of performance simulation tests are designed to evaluate a candidate's managerial potential. So, in work sample test, like say you can give if you want to hire a typist, you can give a similar kind of exercise and ask the person to type or give a sample of the work which he is actually going to carry out. So, that is called a work sample test. If you want to hire a managerial professional or a person who would be carrying out a task, a series of tasks like say negotiation, communication, presentations. So, in that case decision making, in that case you can give a kind of an assessment center can be, or a performance simulation test which is designed to evaluate can be given, or a simulated environment can be designed in which a person can be given similar tasks which he is actually going to perform on the job, the managerial tasks, various types of tasks. So, a role play can be given to the candidate, to a situation can be created where he is supposed to act in a similar manner. So, assessment center tests basically the performance of individuals who would be applying for managerial positions. So, it tests the managerial ability, the cognitive ability of an individual. So, what we have discussed, there are in the stage 2 or the substantive selection, written tests, performance simulation test, interviews are also part of this. Interviews also constitute part of the substantive selection. Interviews are the most important or frequently used selection tool. They carry a degree of weight in the selection process. Nowadays also interview play a significant role in selection of a candidate, selection or rejection of a candidate. So, when you carry out an interview, you get to know about the candidate in more detail rather than in the written tests and performance simulation test. When a person comes and interacts with the interview board, so his personality can be assessed, the way he responds to different situations can be assessed. So, the interviews are most frequently used selection tool. They carry a great degree of weight in the selection process, can be biased towards those who interview well. In some situations, say suppose a person performs very well in the interview, however, his written test and performance simulation test were not very effective. So, still interview gives a greater weightage for the candidate's selection. What are the various types of interviews? Unstructured interview and structured interviews are different types of interviews, behaviorally structured interview. What is unstructured? So, broadly various types of interviews are structured, unstructured and behaviorally structured. Let us begin with the discussion on unstructured or randomly chosen questions. Unstructured, it does not have a proper structure. The questions are picked and chosen as per the convenience of the interview board. So, unstructured interview, it is commonly used, least predictive and prone to bias, because the questions do not come or do not lead the interview board to arrive at a consensus. So, the questions are asked randomly and sometimes as per the convenience of the board members. Next one is structured interview. What is a structured interview? Standardized set of questions are being asked. Mostly a structured interview will help the board members to reach at a consensus, because they have a purpose of asking questions to the person who or to the interviewee, more predictive of job success, less chance of leading to any kind of bias. Then the third one is behaviorally structured interview, asking how specific problems were handled in the past. Behaviorally structured or behavioral interview generally asks candidates how they have handled situations in the past to know about the candidates series of or candidates behavior in different situations. So, past behavior may be good predictor of future behavior. The purpose of behavior assessment or behaviorally structured interview is to know the behavior of the individual in various situations, and with a premise that his past behavior will predict the future success on a particular job. So, what we discussed here in the stage 2 substantive selection technique, there are different techniques or devices which help in selection process. One is written test, performance simulation test, interview, types of, then we discussed about what are the various types of interview. Interviews most often used to determine organization and individual fit. As we discussed somewhere in the section 1, that human resource management is very important. First stage is human resource planning, that is forecasting the need for manpower in the organization, assessing the vacant positions in the organization, and based on the nature of the vacant position, you need to generate a pool of talent from within and from outside the organization. When a pool of talent is available, then the question comes, who should be selected? After the, so how should we select an individual so that the person is exactly fit into the position, or otherwise it is called person job fit. Then the next question arises that the person should also be fit into the business or to the organization's culture. So, person job fit, person organization fit, these two are very important concepts, and a selection process should take care of these things while an interview is being conducted. So, interviews most often used to determine organization individual fit. Then the third stage is the contingent selection. What is contingent selection? It finally checks before hiring a candidate. So, what are the steps being conducted? Conduct the background investigation. So, background check is very important. However, the person may have the competencies, behavioral competencies, the professional competencies, or the job specific competencies, and may prove to be a talent, but it is very important to check the ethical moral index of the candidate, to check the background of the candidate for any kind of any criminal association in the past, or any kind of fictitious behavior in the past. So, conducting background investigation before finally giving an offer to the candidate is must for a selection process. Check social networking sites. Nowadays, since we are all connected through social networking, which can give us an assessment, which also has an advantage, as we can immediately cross check how the person is socially connected through LinkedIn, through Facebook and various other social networking sites to assess who are associated with this individual. So, social networking sites also help in contingent selection process. Now, the talking to the current and the previous supervisors is important to know, to discover more about the person's motivation, competence and ability to work with others, how he has been working with others, his interpersonal skills, trust with others, whether the person selected is being accommodative or not. So, it is generally not selecting the person who can just be intelligent, but he should be emotionally intelligent, so that he can gel with the organization, with the environment, with the fellow colleagues. So, perform credit check or use employment screening services. Then final check before hiring, perform reference check, make sure the candidate has signed a release, always get 2 forms of identification and make applicants fill out job applications. Use a structured reference checking form. There should be a structured questionnaire to check the reference, structured reference checking form. Use given references as a source of others. So, generally when the candidate applies, he gives a reference, set of referees names. We should verify, call them and know from them how the person is connected, what was his past association, how he can, what was the behavior of the individual. So, which is very important step and which need to be checked, and ask the right questions and judge whether the reference answers are evasive or not. Use given references as a source for others. Final check before hiring is drug testing, and to know whether the person has been involved in any kind of in alcoholism, drug abuse and so on, so that you do not hire a wrong candidate for a very important position. So, drug testing commonly done before candidates are formally hired. Many firms test current employees after a work accident or when there are obvious behavioral symptoms. Some companies administer drug tests randomly on a periodic basis, and some firms only administer drug tests when transferring or promoting employees. Because of lifestyle changes, people have started using different modes of enjoyment. So, drugs, drug abuse and alcoholism, it has become a fashion, it has become a lifestyle for many people. But too much of anything is bad for a person, for an individual, and when these things creep into the behavior of individual, it will also affect adversely in the workplace, not only to the individual and his performance, but to the fellow colleagues, to the entire environment, to the entire organization's environment and performance. So, it is very, it should be, the selection should be rationally done, and there is a step by step or a sequential method to be followed, where an individual is eliminated on the basis of discrepancies or certain behavioral problems or certain problems which may not be appropriate in the workplace. So, therefore, selection process need to be followed effectively. Initial selection, substantive selection and contingent selection process is the stages of the selection process are very important. Further moving on to what is orientation. Once we discussed about human resource planning, and then we discussed about recruitment, job analysis, then selection. Now, we are moving on to describing or understanding what is orientation. Orientation is familiarization of an employee to the workplace. So, how does an employer familiarize an employee to the workplace? The first point is making the person understand who are people whom he will be reporting. So, knowing about the reporting relationship. The second point is understanding his work and the nature of the work. So, immediate boss and the peer group with whom he will be working, he or she will be working. The next point is knowing about the organization and the rules, policies, procedures within the boundary of which the person has to perform. So, after that, and what are the benefits and services which will be provided to the employee if he effectively performs? What are the do's and don'ts to be followed in the organization? So, orientation, employee orientation provides new employees with basic background information needed to perform their jobs satisfactorily. It is a kind of socialization or otherwise called workplace socialization. Socialization is continuing process of instilling in all employees the attitude, standard, value and behavioral pattern expected by the company. So, the purpose of orientation is an organization expects that a person who joins should be behaving within the rules and regulations. There should be some performance norms, there should be some kind of behavioral norms to be followed. So, these orientation is very important. Now, we will discuss about the type of orientation program. Orientation in different organizations are differently followed, can be brief sometimes, informal introductions sometimes followed in organizations, or sometimes it is a lengthy orientation program, or sometimes formal program of orientation which may extend to half day or more. New hires usually receive printed or web based handbooks, employee benefits, personnel policies, daily routines, company organization or operations and safety measures or regulations. And purpose of employee socialization or orientation. Socialization of a new employee is done because it is an occasion to welcome new employee and it overcomes initial uneasiness and hesitation. When an individual joins on the first day, there are many apprehensions. whether there is a right decision being taken or not. The person is always in a dilemma. So, to overcome that uneasiness, to overcome that hesitation, organizations must come forward with the employee socialization plans, which will help in exchanging information between the individual and the peers, the supervisor, acclimatizing employee, or it is a kind of making person free with the environment or acclimatized to the environment, fostering team spirit or improving the interpersonal relationship. So, it is a kind of ice breaking exercise for an individual. So, develop suitable values, standards, beliefs among employees. What is the benefit of employee socialization or orientation? Socialization of new employee involves following benefits. What are these? Job satisfaction due to newcomers understanding their role. So, as we discussed that there is a discomfort or there is a hesitation or apprehension in the mind of an individual when he leaves one job and joins another, or when he enters into the workplace for the first time. So, there is a kind of a hesitation, so which will be a barrier in performance. So, that hesitation need to be overcome through employee socialization programs. Employee socialization program will help improve or will help in making person understand the various aspects of the job, various people who would be working with him, and job satisfaction may arise. So, the person would overcome the initial barriers or initial inhibitions, and this process will help in improving the job satisfaction due to newcomers understanding their roles. So, this will help individuals to know about their roles, responsibilities, the task which they will be carrying out, and it will otherwise help in improving the level of satisfaction of an individual. Then commitment to organization due to clarity of norms, organizational norms and culture and its expectations. So, as the person understands his or her roles, responsibilities, supervisors, so there would be slowly a sense of satisfaction and intrinsic motivation which will help him to be more committed to the job or the responsibility being assigned to. Performance proficiency due to higher integration with organizational processes. The person would be integrated, would be working with other individuals in coordination with other individuals. So, there would be performance proficiency due to higher integration with various processes in the job. Loyalty to organization due to high level of congruence, that is extent to which an employee perceives that organizational resources and his or her skills are mutually satisfying. So, there would be a larger or say more loyalty to the organization due to high level of congruence. Congruence means when persons persons personal motives or personality there is an alignment between individual's goal and organizational goal. Each individual has his or her own personal aspirations to somebody would be willing to excel in a particular job role. So, if there is an alignment or if there is a personal interest and he has been an individual likes a particular job and he has been positioned, he has been given that responsibility. So, there would be alignment of the personal goals with the organizational goals, or you can say a high level of congruence, that is the extent to which employee perceives organizational resources and the skills are mutually satisfying. So, the organization provides some environment, provides a convenient environment, a conducive environment which will help the individual to grow. So, this will in return generate loyalty of an individual to the organization and would also lead to higher performance. We will also further discuss about various stages of employee orientation. The stages of employee orientation will be discussed in the next stage, next lecture. So, what we discussed in this section, we discussed about the selection. Selection is an important stage of identifying the right candidate with use of a right selection technique, so that the person would be effectively performing. Then we further discussed about what are the various stages of selection process: initial selection, substantive selection and contingent selection. We discussed about application forms and background checks in the initial selection. Then we discussed about written tests, performance simulation test and interviews in the substantive selection. And contingent selection, we discussed about investigating the background through social networking site, through current and previous supervisors, and performing credit check, and finally checking about the individual's reference and other before hiring, the person should be also tested for any kind of drug abuse or ethical on verifying the candidate on ethical moral index. And further we discussed about orientation, which is otherwise employees socialization with the workplace, and orientation types we discussed, and which will help in individual to acclimatize to the workplace, so that he can effectively perform, which will be good for the organization. With this, we are concluding the lecture here, and in the next lecture I will discuss about I will discuss about the stages of employee orientation, training and so on. Thank you.